Hi, John. It's good to see you.
It is great seeing you, Sean.
What is on your mind this week?
Um, well, I thought I would share a little story with you about something that happened to me that will explain maybe a little bit about how the on channel interprets messages from the back channel and sometimes
Okay.
misinterprets, maybe often misinterprets. Um, Casey and I went out to dinner with some friends recently in the last few days, and thought we had a great dinner, great time. Uh, Came home, everything was fine, but in the night, right before I went to bed, I wasn't feeling real well, and I didn't really tie it to dinner, but I just wasn't feeling well, and I woke up the next morning. I was awake during the night a little bit. The next morning, I woke up, and that was the last thing on my mind was feeling bad because of and what we'd done the night before. But I had this sense as I went in to kind of go through my routines as I sat down in the living room, I was going, man, I am really dreading this, and it was this really heavy sense of dread, like kind of like when you're in trouble with at the principal's office, but it was like
Mm-hmm.
just that dread, like I'm dreading this, and then I stopped and was thinking, what is it that I'm dreading? And I was trying to think what I was dreading because everything was going pretty well. My daughter is on summer vacation, so I get to see her more. My son came home for a few weeks from Scotland and just got here, so I was excited that he was here. There wasn't really any deadlines because there was really nothing. I couldn't think of anything to pin my feeling of dread to. So then I was going, what is it? And then I was thinking, oh, during the night I wasn't feeling good. I wonder if it had something to do with last night with what I ate. And then when Casey got up, she one of the first things she said is, "Man, I had kind of a rough night. Did you have a rough night?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And she said, "I think it's something we ate last night." So it came back to something with the wasn't sitting well in my stomach, and my back channel is sending that message like this isn't good. Probably trying to say, let's not eat what you ate last night. Let's not do that again because we're not feeling good.
Mm.
But my on channel trying to interpret it was going, man, I'm really dreading this that's coming up. And then I was thinking, wait, what is coming up? So yeah, I just thought that was interesting how at first I think that's what it was. I still don't know for sure, but I'm pretty confident that it was something that I'd eaten.
Yeah, but your back channel is trying to send some message, and probably we ate something. I wouldn't say bad, but something that we're reacting to. Don't eat that again. But your on channel's job is to try to interpret the message.
Hmm.
And so you because you're saying you use that word dread,
Hmm.
and so that's the on channel kind of saying it's dread that you're feeling.
Yeah, that's right. Because I think we talked about this one other time when we were talking about emotions and saying that common sense has emotions backwards. We think that we understand an emotion and then we have a physiological response to it, but actually it's flipped. It's the other way around. We have the physiological response first, and then the on channel labels that emotion. So I think my physiological response was something's not sitting well in my stomach,
Mm-hmm.
and then my response to that, my on channel labeled that as, oh, I'm dreading something. Something's coming up that I don't want to do, or I'm going to have to do something I'm trying to avoid. And I still haven't thought of what that was. So I think it was just mislabeling at first.
But then the next phase of that, right, is you have the physiological response. Your on channel labels it as dread. Then the next, because the on channel is now trying to interpret things, the next step then is to try to figure out what you're dreading.
Yeah, that's the way I was working through it.
And
And
so
usually you don't
now,
have to figure it out. It just kind of something comes to mind, like I'm dreading this, and you go, "Oh yeah, it's that I'm dreading."
okay, so that's where I'm going, is as though you then identify what the thing is that you're dreading,
Hmm.
and then you actually start dreading that thing.
Oh, so
Is
it's kind
that
of like how emotions is happening. You're saying that it's it's the opposite of emotions. You're labeling it first and then responding instead of,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. I like that because I actually was searching for something to dread.
Right.
I would have
That's
ended on
exactly what
something
I
if I
mean
would have
is
found it.
if you could find something that you're even a little bit uncomfortable about or something, I don't know, again, like in this process of trying to figure out what I'm feeling, okay, I label it dread. What am I dreading? Oh, this thing. And then I
Hmm.
actually start dreading the thing because it's got to be. So then I start finding reasons why I'm going to, I guess what I'm describing is like if you're not self-aware or interested in trying to figure these things out, you actually just created emotions around an event that actually weren't there. You did that.
You're kind of sabotaging yourself in a way.
Kind of,
Yeah.
like, and then all of a sudden you start dreading that thing and then it's real.
Hmm.
And then maybe you start finding excuses not to do that thing.
Yeah, and then that sets up also. Now that's part of the filters in your back channel and the schemas that you're building. Now you're adding that to your schema about this thing that you're dreading, which originally maybe there wasn't a reason to dread it, but now that you are dreading it, that becomes part of your schemas. So now in the future, you're always looking at that event or event similar to that as being having some type of a negative connotation.
Yeah. And
That's
it's
really
all
interesting.
just
Yeah.
because you ate something that didn't agree with you.
Because I had a little bit of indigestion. Now all of a sudden,
Yeah.
I don't like what a play or something because I had
Right.
indigestion and thought I was dreading going to a play.
Hmm.
Yeah, that happens. That I know that happens. Yeah,
Well, yeah. I just want to be aware of it. Right. Like, because the next thing then is someone asks me to go to a play and I'm like, I don't like plays.
yeah,
I don't like plays. Why not?
and you
I don't know.
probably,
They're just not for me or whatever.
yeah, you'll make up a reason why you don't like
Yeah.
them. And
Yeah.
and probably and also that your brain works on association. So now you've associated that feeling of dread with the play that you were going to go to. So anytime play comes up, it also brings up the associations around a play. So it might be like it might bring up associations about the Nutcracker or whatever plays you've seen. But then
Right.
one of those associations is also, I really hate play. I dread plays. I dread them so bad.
The
And
things that we do to ourselves.
yeah, and I don't want to say that now all of a sudden you'll never go to a play again. That's just a subtle change, but it could have a subtle effect. And so next time, maybe you don't really dread the play, but you say, I've got stuff going on that week. Something you could cancel and go to the play, but you decide not to. That just reinforces that where next time you're probably even more likely to try to find a way out of it. So it's just
Yeah.
little subtle changes that build over time. It's kind of scary in a way,
Yeah. If you
but
don't
it's also
understand it, or
empowering.
I was going to say, it's if you don't take the time to think about these things and understand, even at the basic level, how your own brain works. Whole point of this podcast is for me not to go into this whole thing, this whole, not a spiral, but, where I end up, having feelings attached to certain things that aren't real. I created them.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, but you're right. If you don't know how it works, then you're just kind of at the mercy of the system. We know
Yeah.
how the system works, and everybody can know how the system works if you learn how the system works, which is what we're talking about, like you said. But once you know how the system works, you don't have to be at its whim. You can, now that I know that little things like that I do can change it, then I can start planning to think about things a certain way and to do certain things and kind of arrange things to create the schemas I'm wanting to build to
Yeah.
change behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good,
Well, I
interesting.
wanted to ask you, well, I'll start off with it. I know it's not a documentary, but I just watched, well, The Accountant Part Two.
Hmm.
A movie just came out with Ben Affleck, so I went back and I watched the first one,
Hmm.
to so that I could watch the second one. But either way, I love those movies. But in them, and have you seen either one of those?
I've seen the first one.
Okay. And so in the first one, he is the character is autistic,
Hmm.
but highly functioning form of autism. Um, that, but so again, makes him good at being an accountant, makes him good at also being, pretty lethal, but also has things that, that like lack of eye contact, awkward in social situations. It just, watching that movie got me thinking, because I've heard the term before, like someone's on the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that's a negative way of describing some of these. This is a disorder, right?
Yes.
You'd classify it as a disorder,
Yes, it's classified as disorder. It's not a disease, it's a
right?
disorder, and it has to do with brain development and brain functioning. So the
Brain
wiring of the brain.
development,
Hmm.
meaning,
So, for example, the prefrontal cortex. At the front of your brain is the frontal cortex, but the prefrontal is right behind your forehead, and that's where
mhm.
like executive control and things like that. Those are some of the things that are processed there, and decision making. Um, it develops faster in children that have autism, and so does the amygdala. And so these not sure why, but they develop faster. They wire together faster, so they grow faster, sooner, I should say,
In
in people
people
with
with
autism.
autism.
Hmm. And autism is also almost always diagnosed in childhood. So you can see, some disorders like schizophrenia, which is also due to brain wiring and brain functioning. It doesn't really present until the late teens to early 20s, but autism presents in childhood.
But help me just surface level understand, why would those regions growing faster have this effect?
So, yeah, the problem with the difficulty of this, or the challenging part of thinking through it, is because when we label a brain area like the prefrontal cortex, like I just did, I say it's
Hmm.
like control of executive functioning and decision making, just to throw out a couple of things that it does. Now it seems like that autism should affect those things because that's what we're talking about. But in reality, autism affects, I mean, those brain areas do so much more than just what I just mentioned. So there's
Okay.
like a
Okay.
thousand things they do rather than just three things they do. And the
Right.
same with the amygdala. But the idea, some of the kind of behavioral um, issues that you see in uh, children with autism is very repetitive behaviors. So just whatever they're doing, they want to do it over and over. And they're very focused in on things. They don't like to be, outside information. And then, the like stimulation from the outside noises, lights, and things really kind of bother them. They want to kind of calm all of that down. So those are some of the kind of behavioral uh, outputs of
Hmm.
children with autism. Some of the things you see behaviorally, but you mentioned the spectrum,
Yeah.
and so that's. I think I want to say two things about the spectrum. One is that that's really uh, medical the medical model of autism is to try to classify people and put them on a spectrum, because autism includes, it's a very wide range of things, of developmental disorders, and things like Asperger's, and there's just multiple parts to it. And so saying that you're on a spectrum means that you're within this kind of cluster of behavior and neurological things that we can identify. And so you're on that spectrum. So it's kind of like a checklist of things. And there's starting to be a bit of a pushback against the spectrum, the autism spectrum, to say we shouldn't look at people with autism as being on a spectrum where you check boxes to describe who they are. Um, and we should start looking at them differently so that we can develop treatments differently and treat them differently and those types of things. There's also a social model of autism where it's just about it's the, kind of saying that autism is a different way of being. And so that results in, you say, well, this person's different, they just don't fit in. So it kind of excludes people from social groups because they behave differently because of autism. So there's kind of a pushback on that one as well. And I think one of the more recent ideas is to have a predicament model, like they're in a predicament. They have some developmental issues that put them in a predicament. So it kind of rejects the spectrum metaphor that ranks people on a scale from high functioning to low functioning,
Mm-hmm.
and embraces their individuality. And then the idea behind this is that then you can ask the question, what does being autistic mean? Because now you're not saying, well, you've already like labeled them and classified them on the spectrum as being this, 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 and this. Now you can say, well, what does being autistic mean? So that's one part of the spectrum. The other part is just to point out that a spectrum is just like a continuum, that you're, you know, closer to one end or the other. You're somewhere on that spectrum. And
Right.
so you could think of almost every behavior as being a spectrum. And so you have like maybe you have a spectrum where on one end is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where people are always cleaning and everything. Your pencils have to be lined up just right, and your drink has to be a certain area, a certain location next to your plate at a certain angle, and all of these things. And then on the other end of that spectrum is maybe uh, people that what am I trying to hoarders, like you're hoarding and your
Oh
house is
yeah.
just a wreck.
Yeah.
And so that could be a spectrum. We all fall somewhere on that spectrum. So it's kind of the idea that we're all on spectrums. So
Yeah.
I think that's a way to also kind of soften the blow about people with autism being on a spectrum.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so the there was there's an emotional how do I do that people with autism
Hmm.
sometimes, and I don't want to label everybody, but have problems identifying emotions in others.
Yes. Yeah. So there are behavioral deficits. Yes.
Okay.
And
And so
that's one of the main deficits are social interaction, deficits in social interactions.
deficits in social interactions. Okay. But the lack of a or the difficulty in identifying emotions in others, like
Hmm.
you're not recognizing when someone's angry or when those things. Um, Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. I was just agreeing with that. I think that it's uh, you know people with autism sometimes are, you're right, they have difficulty recognizing other people's emotions.
Hmm.
They're usually uh, score low on empathy scales and things. And a lot of this is another concept that's been researched a lot with the topic of autism, is theory of mind or theory of other minds. And it's the idea that if you have a theory of mind, it means that you understand that other people have mental states like you do, and so other people have feelings and things like you do. And that's developed in childhood. You're not born with a theory of mind. So children think that whatever they're thinking or whatever they're seeing and experiencing, that everybody else is experiencing that.
Right.
And so one of the like if I were to say that let's say Casey came into a room and you were sitting in the room and she put a donut on your plate, and then you got up, you just had an emotional reaction to that. Was that the tie in between? I kind of did that on purpose
I
for a
know.
ex
I know
police
you
officer
did.
and a donut. So
Yes.
you get up and leave the room,
Hmm.
and Casey comes back in and moves the donut from the plate over to the windowsill next to the window. And then she asks me, when Sean comes back in, where is he going to look for the donut? And if I don't have theory of mind, I'll say on the windowsill, because I know that's where it's at. So I'm assuming you know where that's at. So I'll just say on the windowsill. But if I have theory of mind, I'll say, well, he'll look on the table on the plate, because because
The
now I
last
can
place.
understand that what's going on in your mind. In your mind, when you left the room, it was on the plate. So when you come back in
Mhm.
the room, you're going to think it's on the plate. So there's studies like that. It was a marble in a basket, but I couldn't pass up the donut reference. But
Yeah,
they
thank
do
yeah.
this with with children, with like a marble in a basket, or they move the marble, and things like that. Or there's, with Smarties, there's a Smartie test that's similar. But children around the ages of 4 to 5 years start to develop this theory of mind. And so people with autism develop it as well, but maybe not as deeply as other people. And again, this is when we're talking about spectrums. We're all on a spectrum. You probably know people that when something, they're so emotionally tied to other people that if something happens to somebody else, they take it so hard. It's so devastating to them, even though it didn't happen to them. So they're on a scale where they're very empathetic, and they have a lot of empathy and a lot of emotions tied to that. So they're really understanding what somebody else is feeling. And then some are less, like I'm less like that. So I have to work to try to understand somebody else's point of view. And then, people with autism would be like me, or maybe even less theory of mind. So yeah, that's a big part of it is theory of mind.
Hmm.
I mean, a big
Okay.
research. It's a research area in looking at this.
Right. Because it's in the beginning, it was sounding like empathy to me, but now
Hmm.
now that you've explained more, I do. It's broader than that. It's bigger than just empathy.
Yeah, it is, and maybe would it help to, I was just talking about brain areas, but there's three brain areas that are that are involved in this, that are kind of interesting, if you want me to mention them
Yeah.
real
Yeah.
quick. So the four lobes is the frontal, and then on top of the head's the parietal, and in the very back's the occipital, and then on each side are the temporal. So you have a temporal lobes on the sides behind your ears, the parietals on top of your head, the frontals behind your forehead, and the occipital. So the one of the main areas involved is the medial prefrontal cortex. So remember, when we say the word, once you learn the words, it's so easy to figure out where things are. So medial is the opposite of lateral. So medial meaning towards the middle. So
Okay.
the medial prefrontal, and I already said prefrontal is at the front of the frontal cortex, like right behind your forehead. So the medial prefrontal would be like right behind the bridge of your nose. So that's one area, and that's used when we're thinking about other people's, what they might be thinking and their intentions. So again, it's kind of the executive center where we make decisions. So it's an area that helps us understand why somebody else is making the decision they're making. So that part of the brain is involved in that. And then where the temporal lobes meet the parietal, if this is getting too deep, just stop me.
No, 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 not yet. Not
So
yet.
where the temporal lobes meet the parietal, there's a crease where they come together, and that's called the temporal parietal junction because so the TPJ, temporal parietal junction, especially on the right side, is very engaged in this, and this is related to perspective taking and trying to assign beliefs or understand other people's belief system and what they're actually believing, and not like necessarily religious beliefs. I just mean, like, you believe, I was thinking you would believe the donut was on the windowsill instead of, so that type of thing.
Right.
And then the third one you know of, it's one of your favorites, the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, which
Error
is
detector.
error detector. So this is about kind of the conflicts between self and others, understanding if there's a conflict between what I think you're believing and what you're believing. So it's kind of monitoring that. And then the precuneus, I forgot there's a fourth place. The precuneus is in the medial, so the inside posterior, which is back parietal lobe. So this parietal lobe towards the back middle is the precuneus, and that's reflective self-awareness, trying to imagine a different viewpoint that somebody else has taken. So those are the areas. And if there's disruptions in those areas, and I'm not talking about people with autism, I'm talking about from a stroke or from damage, acute damage to any of those areas, it affects people's theory of mind. So
Right. Like
then that's,
even damage to one of those areas, even though you have three other functioning areas that are still in this process, it can disrupt this
yeah,
greatly.
it'll disrupt the system. And usually, according to how it was, where the damage took place. So if it's
Right.
at the RTPJ, so the right temporal parietal junction, then you might have a hard time of taking somebody else's perspective in an argument, like, oh, I see it from your point of view, because that side just is. You might still, be able to do some of the other things, but you might really struggle with perspective taking, or trying to understand what somebody else believes about something.
Right.
And so knowing that those are kind of the four areas, and that brain damage affects those areas, then that also gives some insight into people with autism. Well, they have strengths and weaknesses too in these different areas. So it allows, doctors, clinicians, therapists to kind of know which area to hone in on to help them with treatments.
Okay.
That was a
I was
lot,
th-
I know.
no, no, no. I don't think. I mean, we butted right up against. This is too much. Big words for Sean and science. But I don't think we crossed that line. Made actual
Okay.
complete sense to me.
Well,
Yeah.
so some real life examples sometimes helps.
Yeah.
So,
That always helps me.
so, when you get somebody a birthday present, you're kind
Mhm.
of guessing, you're putting yourself in their place, say, what would they want? You don't always have to do that, but a lot of times we do that. Sometimes we buy a birthday gift that we would want. But a lot of times you think, okay, this is what that person would probably want. Or another big one that people with autism struggle with is understanding sarcasm in language
Mm.
and jokes. And so uh, you've probably been around people that you'll say, "Oh yeah, that was a good way to do it," and then they'll say, "Well, actually, that wasn't a good way to do it. That turned out really bad." And you go, "Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
that was sarcasm. Yeah.
yeah." So they missed the sarcasm, and
Right.
I've I experienced this for myself and know what it's like, because talking with some of my friends and colleagues from overseas and other countries, they'll use their common idioms or colloquial sayings that just go right over my head, and I have no idea what they mean. And so one of them, I'm trying to think what it was. He said, one of my friends, I said something. They said, "Yeah, well, Bob's your uncle." And then I was going, "Actually, I have several uncles, but none of them are named Bob." But it was like, like, well, that does it. That's the reason why, or whatever. Well, Bob's your uncle.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
the reason why. And it just right over my head. So I know what that kind of feels like, and that has happened quite a few times, because sometimes what they say sounds like it means one thing when it means the other. So then I'm taking the wrong idea. So it can be frustrating and confusing. And I know people that struggle with the literalness of language kind of have those struggles where they get
Mm.
frustrated in conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Telling white lies. People with autism struggle with that. They usually just tell the truth. Like,
Just brutally honest.
does this dress
Like,
make me look fat?
yeah, it's horrible on you. Right. Like, yeah.
Yeah, the brutal comments. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I
Hmm.
say, "Sean, does my hair look good today?" You're like, "Yeah, it looks really good," but inside you're going, "That is really. I don't know what he's doing. He needs a haircut." So
Your
it's,
hair
but
does look good.
you don't say that. You just say, "Yeah, it looks good," because
Yeah.
socially, that it would hurt my feelings if you said the other. But if you don't understand, if it's hard to put yourself in somebody else's place, you don't understand how that would hurt their feelings. And that also means that if I ask somebody and they said, "Yeah, it doesn't look good," I would want to know that so I can fix it. It's not like, so I don't get my feelings hurt as bad either if I can't understand somebody else's feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going down a different road, and now that you've explained theory of mind, that makes complete sense to me. The emotion side, I was thinking about something to do with mirror neurons. You've explained
Mm.
mirror neurons before. I didn't know if like, and well, let me just ask this. I don't know if there's any research, but like someone with autism who is shown pictures of faces, smiling face, angry face, sad face, that um, they're not as able to that this is a question, are they able to identify those emotions as well as a neurotypical brain?
No, they're not as good at that generally.
But you're saying that's not mirror neurons, or not the whole
Well,
story?
well, mirror neurons do play a role in it. And that's
Okay.
usually where you can see it is you can watch somebody who's looking at the pictures and get an idea how their mirror neuron system is working. Or if you've watched somebody, like if you've had a video you want somebody to watch, so you give them your phone. And so they have your
Mm-hmm.
phone now and you can't see what they're watching. So you're just watching their facial expressions. You can tell where it is in the video when they'll laugh and then they'll go, shocked. And then, so they kind of mirror whatever expressions or whatever moods they're seeing on the video.
Right.
And that's because of the mirror neuron system. So
Okay.
that's another big part of research into autism. Um, I should mention that the neuron the neuron. Have you heard of those? The
I've those are new to me.
the mirror neuron system, um, when it was first discovered and talked about, it all of a sudden it just blew up. It became huge, and it solved all the questions we had about consciousness and about learning, and everybody was extremely excited about mirror neurons. And then it turns out, like most things, they're not as big a deal as we originally thought
Oh.
they were.
Oh.
But
Okay.
but they still are a big deal, but they don't solve all of the questions we had.
Oh, and
So
there was, in the beginning, the belief was this answers all of these questions about how we
yeah,
operate.
yeah, in neuroscience, yeah, it's answering all the questions we couldn't answer. Maybe this one thing will answer all these things we couldn't answer, and it turned out that it can't. But it's still very interesting, and it was discovered when researchers were measuring responses from neurons in the motor cortex of monkeys. And they found out when they would reach to grab a handle that this certain set of motor neurons, there'd be a burst of activity, which was initiating that movement to reach for the handle.
Mm-hmm.
And then they noticed, kind of accidentally, some of the first studies, is that another monkey reached for that handle, and the monkey that had the electrodes in that they were measuring from was just watching, and that same group of neurons had a burst of activity in the same way as when that monkey reached for it. So watching somebody else reach for it created this response. So it was called a mirror neuron because it's mirroring the behavior that caused that excitation, whatever was exciting those motor neurons to create the behavior. If somebody else
Mm-hmm.
created that behavior, it responded as well, and in the premotor area as well. So there was that's a kind of a strictly congruent type thing. And then there's a broadly congruent that they found out that even when humans reach for that lever, that those neurons would fire. And then even, what people at a park that work at a park will go around with a bag picking up trash, but they have the long stick with the little trigger that
Mm-hmm.
pinches stuff together. They even got
Yeah.
one of those and went and pinched the lever, and it caused the neurons to fire, not as heavily, not as strong of a fire, but it's like that's kind of a broadly congruent, because it's the same idea of grasping. It's not a hand that's grasping it.
Something is reaching out towards that handle, and it's
Mm-hmm.
close enough, and that causes the reaction.
Yes. And so you see this in everyday life. People are now thinking that maybe that's what yawning is from. When you see somebody yawn and then you yawn, it's your mirror neuron system potentially. Or when you catch somebody else's mood. Somebody's depressed, and all of a sudden you find yourself really, like, you come in really happy and somebody's depressed, and it's like 10 minutes later your shoulders are slumping and you're feeling
Hmm.
really depressed too, because you're catching their mood. Or if you watch somebody, like if you're watching America's Funniest Home Videos or watching something on TikTok or YouTube or whatever, and you see somebody wreck a bike or crash, and you cringe, or you grab your knee when they bump their knee, and it feels like it, you can almost feel it's like, ah. So that's largely due to the mirror neuron system.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
it's how we learn, like how we understand. It's two things. It's learning, because you can watch somebody, like, you can watch somebody swing a golf club the right way a few times, then you can imitate that, because your mirror neurons, as they're swinging, the muscles that it would cause to create that swing, your brain is kind of cycling through that, so that when you get up to do it, it's already had some practice. um, then it's also kind of the empathy side. You understand why somebody is holding their knee, jumping around after bumping it on a coffee table, and you go, I get that. So it's kind of both of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That that makes sense. I see how it's a little bit different,
Mm-hmm.
but still plays a role.
Yeah, and then there's emotional and cognitive empathy, and those are both where you feel the emotions of it, or where you understand why somebody feels like they do. Those are kind of the emotional empathy, is like where you grab your knee when somebody bumps their knee, like, I know how that would feel, that hurts. And then there's a cognitive, like, that, that person just lost their job, that's gotta, like, hit in the gut, that's gotta be tough, kind of the cognitive side of it. So on the mirror neuron system affects the emotional empathy, but there's not much evidence that it affects the cognitive side of
Cognitive.
empathy. Yeah.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
there's this idea of emotional contagion, where it's like we said about when you walk in and somebody's depressed, and then you get depressed, and then four more people walk in and they're talking and laughing a little bit, everybody in the room's depressed. That's emotional contagion, where an emotion can spread through a group.
How, I mean, I know you're using the word contagion,
Mm-hmm.
but is that mirror? Are you saying are we back to mirror neurons, or is that
Yeah,
empathy? What causes that?
it's mirror neurons and empathy. um there's, you've heard of manifesting and things like that, and
Yeah.
I've I got I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole this last weekend, uh, and I don't know, my algorithm on TikTok started feeding to me people that were manifesting and telling people. That's I learned a new term as well. You said something earlier about I almost mentioned when you said you create a spiral. I think when I was talking about dread,
Yeah.
and you create a
Yeah.
spiral, I
Yeah.
learned a new word with manifesting. There are upward spirals, so you spiral upward, and that's a good thing, I guess. But
I
what I
think
hear
that
from,
sounds like a good thing.
if I'm going to
Yeah.
spiral, I would probably rather spiral
Spiral upward.
upwards. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Um, but what I was hearing from multiple creators, is that what they're called? Multiple creators on TikTok
Yeah.
who were talking
Yeah.
about this. They were saying there's an energy in the universe that we're all connected to, and so
The
when
Force.
it's the force,
This is the
and
Force. This
it's
is
with
Star
us.
Wars.
The force is with us. And when it's a collective consciousness that we're all a part of. And so my mood when I walk in, it's like wires connecting, and I send my mood over to you. So they were talking about, which is, I can't tell you how hard it is to listen, but they're talking about brain waves, alpha, beta, delta, data, these brain waves. And they used entrainment. This is what, okay, soapbox for just a second. I'll get right back off, I promise. But pseudoscience does a really good job of using big words and giving partial truths. So it's like a few things are actually true, and they're using big words, but how they tie it all together is completely wrong. And so they used entrainment with uh, the with brainwave entrainment, And there's some research about it, about how a mother and a child are bonding, that when the mother and the child, if they have an EEG cap on both of them and they're looking at each other and they're connecting, and the baby, this is for infants, is looking and cooing at the mother, that their brain waves sync. They start kind of the same rhythm, because brain waves are rhythms. So they both develop kind of a related rhythm with each other. And it doesn't happen with other people as well. It seems to be almost specific just to the mother, which is understandable about bonding and stuff like that. But
It
then
makes sense.
and that's called entrainment. So now they're saying when you walk into a room, everybody's brain waves through entrainment lock into the same frequencies and the same rhythm. And so, yeah, they take partial truths. But anyway, I got on that to say that in manifesting, they're saying that emotions are contagious. This emotional contagion is because brainwave rhythms are locking together. But it's actually, the real science says, it's our mirror neuron system, that
Right.
when we see somebody with their shoulders slumped and their head down, we immediately think about shoulders down, head down being, I'm depressed, I'm sad. And so then out of empathy, we stop our laughing and joking, because, it's just, that's socially, you shouldn't do that. You should be a little bit more respectful or whatever. But that's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
emotional
Yeah.
contagion. It starts passing to others. And it's usually, like, depression is one of the most prominent or most dominant moods that gets passed on quickly. Um, Other moods can get passed, but it's a little bit more slowly. And, some are more, anger is another one that gets passed really quickly.
Huh.
So if you have somebody that's angry, those your mirror neurons are like, whoa, and you see their face getting red and them tensing up. You're going, oh, I know what that is. And you start tensing up, without realizing. Now you're starting to get your water levels going up, and you're not even involved in the situation.
Right. But okay, so it seems like I mean, we only named two, but negative, I don't want to label them, but negative emotions spread faster than positive emotions.
Yes, yeah.
I don't love that, but I understand it.
Well, and negative thoughts are more prominent than positive thoughts.
Yeah.
Negative, and it's all, in my belief, it all goes back to kind of survival,
Yeah.
understanding what's happening so you can respond appropriately and survive. And whether that's physically survive or socially survive, it's good to know when bad things are happening.
Right. Yeah. And I think we've touched on this before. Um, my feeling of, from a survival standpoint, um, better to go to I keep saying negative, but it's like, when you see something on four legs coming through the bushes and has sharp teeth, and you're like, if your first thought is, well, maybe it's nice and I'll go pet it, you might not be around too long. Now, I'm not
No.
trying to say that it's all the same, but I just mean like me seeing that same thing and going, it's probably going to hurt me. I'm going to run. Even if I'm wrong, my likelihood of surviving is going to be higher. So then I take those
You're
same,
more likely to pass your cautious genes on to somebody else than
yes,
your not smart genes don't get passed on.
Exactly. Okay. So I got theory of mind. I got mirror neurons. And then give me the last with the contagion again. Emotional
Well,
contagion.
emotional contagion. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then I think if we're talking about autism, I think it's hard to pass or to walk by some of today's thoughts around autism. So maybe we
Meaning,
should
what are
just
those? Yeah, I'd like
touch
to
on
hear
that.
those.
So like, um, different people uh, have a misunderstanding about the ideology of autism, what causes autism.
Oh boy, I know I know what you're
Yeah.
referencing. So
Okay.
what's one of them?
Well, the biggest one's vaccines.
Yeah, and
But
so why? Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off but I've been hearing this this same kind of it's rhetoric. It's rhetoric that um, vaccines are a
Hmm.
direct cause of autism.
Hmm.
But you're saying, so here, let me ask you this: in your understanding or opinion, can vaccines speed up the growth of your prefrontal cortex?
That's a good way to think about it. And I don't think there's any evidence suggesting that. No.
Because I really doubt that there's any evidence that
Mm-mm.
say, okay, so what else about
Well,
this?
see, I think this is good because we're a podcast about how the brain works. So I think it's good to kind of
Hmm.
debunk this or talk about it. And I do want to be careful in the sense that I want to be respectful because I know there are a lot of well-intentioned people that have been led down the wrong road, and it's not their fault really. I mean, honestly, if you're not in this area and you have somebody that sounds like they know what they're talking about, it's easy to believe somebody. So I just want to be respectful for that. But just a few facts around autism. It's not particular to any race or culture or economic status. So people all around the globe, whether they're in highly developed countries or underdeveloped countries or whatever their race, culture, it doesn't really it doesn't matter. I mean, autism is everywhere. The second thing is males are 4 times more likely to get autism than females. So that tells you there's a genetic basis to it. If it was just
Is any reason? I mean, that's just a stat that we know, but maybe not
yeah.
any theory or reason why that is.
Well, so that would be that the precursor for autism at least is carried on the X chromosome, right? Yeah, so or on the Y chromosome.
Yeah.
But that's the genetic reason for it.
Hmm.
Um, and then I mean a genetic basis. And by the way, all science is always evolving. What we talk about is science's best guess of based on what we know right now. The information we have right now, here's what science says the best guess of what's happening is. And that's always going to change as technology changes and more research is done and things like that. So our the best guess right now is that it's mostly a genetic cause, but there's also environmental factors as well. So besides genetic inheritance, it seems like when children born to older parents are more
Hmm.
likely to develop autism. Um, Low birth weight is a predictor, not a big predictor. These are all small predictors, but just things along the line that we're looking at, meaning there's something in the environment that can also have an effect. And whether that's expressing the gene or not, or whatever, also exposure to environmental toxins like lead can have an effect, and even viral infections of the central nervous system.
But
But
if we're going, if I just have to ask then, because I was being real, I don't even know the right word, but when I was talking about vaccines, but if you're saying that environmental factors such as lead or other things could lead to autism,
mhm.
then it's not that much of a stretch, just if we're going to keep it surface level, because I think as we dive a little deeper into this, I still think that it's a tough argument to make about vaccines. But I mean, how do you then? Um, I don't want to say argue, but if lead or other environmental factors can lead to autism, then why can't vaccines?
Well, yeah, I mean that's a great question, and the fact that other environmental toxins and things that their studies show they do, it's like, well, then every environmental toxin can. But that argument doesn't make sense. Just like, well, if caffeine hypes you up, then everything like that should hype you up. And we know that different things have different effects on the brain. And so there has been a ton of research around vaccines specifically,
Mm-hmm.
testing it. And this all started with an article in 1998 by oh shoot, I know his name, and Andrew Wakefield, I believe was his name, from the UK. And
Okay.
there were like, I don't know, 10 or so other authors of the paper, but he published a paper that said there may be that autism may be loosely tied to vaccines. And this was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Um, so the statement wasn't that strong to begin with because they were looking at other things. But at the end, he said it may be tied to that, loosely tied to that. And then, that created this huge stir because at the time there was a group in the UK that were protesting against pharmaceutical companies and against vaccines, and that gave them a voice almost immediately, and it started spreading like crazy.
Mm.
And then it obviously spread over here. And part of this is if I have a child with autism, I want to know why. I want to know why my child has autism and somebody else's child doesn't.
Right.
And if you can tell me, oh, it's simple, it's a vaccine, then that's something I can grab a hold of, and I can be angry with the vaccines. If you're saying we don't know, it could be a lot of things, that just leaves you kind of empty and like, I need to know. So I think, was it, I might be saying that Jenny McCarthy, is that the actor?
Jenny
And
McCarthy, Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey, yeah, started a foundation or whatever. They started really pushing this idea about vaccines. A lot of people started saying we need to get rid of vaccines. This is what's causing autism. Our current Secretary of Health and Human Services, who I don't have, I don't extend the same grace and sympathy to the Secretary of Health and Human Services as I do other people, because he should know better, or he shouldn't be in the position he's in. But these other groups started kind of pushing this idea, and so then in the field of science, now all of a sudden there's a ton of researchers in this area that are going, we didn't know that was a connection. So now there's a ton of research to look at vaccine and autism,
Mm.
and study after study after study after study is turning out results that there's no links. And they start looking at it in different ways, doing different things. So then this is what I've told you before happens in science, and why I believe that you can only get away with something for a little bit in science, and why there's no conspiracy theories in science, because there's people all over the globe now that are taking Andrew Wakefield's paper and saying, we're going to replicate it, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not finding the results. And then so they are saying, well, let's try it a little bit different. And there's, I don't know, probably tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars of research that went into this based on this study looking at vaccines, that probably we wouldn't have gone down that road. It would have been spent in other things, but it was spent there because of this paper. So the journal started doing an investigation and found out that the paper, well, they knew the paper was written about 12 individuals. So it was only based on 12 people, not a large number.
Small sample size.
Very
Very
small sample
small.
size for this type of study. And I've
Right.
told you, for kind of physiological neurophysiology, for those types of studies where you're measuring a brain cell's response to a stimulus or something, you can have one or two or three people. But something like autism that's heterogeneous, has so many different potential causes and outcomes, you need very large study groups. They had 12, and 8 of those children were connected to attorneys that were representing the protesters that were suing the pharmaceutical companies. And the researchers, Andrew Wakefield and his colleagues, received millions of dollars to do the research from this group. And then the group used that for their protests. So the journal, after looked into it, they initially looked into it and said, we don't see anything on the surface that's causing a problem, but they revisited again later. And in 2010, I think it was, because it was like 12 years later. So 2010, they retracted that paper from their journal and said, we no
Oh.
longer support it. And Andrew Wakefield and his colleagues were punished for bad science, basically. And it's kind of like they did something wrong and they came up with wrong results that nobody can replicate. And how many people have listened to them? Everybody in the scientific field, but people outside of science don't want to let that go. And so now you have a mountain of evidence on one side, and you have one paper with 12 people that's been retracted on the other. And that's the one that our Secretary of Human Health Services is relying on, that one and some others that are not even stated that strongly, against this whole mountain of evidence the other direction. So I want people to know that if you've heard that vaccines cause autism, they absolutely do not. From everything we know about the science right now, there is no doubt, based on the science we have right now, that answer is correct, that they do not cause autism. Science is always evolving. There might be something that shows up later, I don't know, but as of right, if we're basing decisions right now, we should always base our decisions on what our best evidence of what we know right now.
Right
You
now.
can't predict into the future and say, well, later we're going to find out that the moon is just a flat disk or whatever. So let's make these. You can't. You have to base it on what we know right now. And so right now, just the mountain of evidence shows vaccines do not cause autism. There are some environmental toxins that do, but not vaccines. So I think that's important to say that while we're talking.
I'm
about
glad
this.
you said that. I think that's a really important message and I love that you're taking a stand. So listen, anybody who's listened to this show or knows Dr. Page knows that one of my great frustrations in our friendship is when I ask a question, he will very rarely give me a straight answer. It's always, well, the research suggests, or, we don't know. So to hear John take a stance like he just took, there's a lot of power in that statement, because he doesn't make statements like that lightly. So when I'm hearing you talk like that, I'm like, wow, this has got to be really solid.
Yeah, and on the other hand, I don't want to say something like that if there's a question, because then I'm leading people astray. So I haven't done the research, but just on almost if you pick a topic, I don't know, just pick a topic, I bet I could find papers on both sides. Like 80% of the evidence says this, 20% says this, or something like that. Right. And then you say, but we got to go with the 80%. But on this one, it's just so lopsided and overwhelming that it's like, it's crazy.
This is a very small piece of this, but what does punishment in a case like this look like?
So first, the shame of getting an article retracted without you retracting it. So there are some scientists who realize that one of their procedures was wrong, or that they didn't we didn't randomize the trial, and other people aren't finding the same thing. So they'll come back and come forward and say,
but we
didn't use the best. We self-report, and
they come forward.
We request to retract it. Yes. In that case, there's really no punishment. There's no punishment. They gave Andrew Wakefield and his colleagues so many opportunities. They would say, no, we're standing on that, because at that point you have attorneys that have given you millions of dollars. I can't imagine that the punishment from that side would be less than from the science side. I think I'd rather be punished by this field of science than by all the attorneys that are going after my hide. So they stuck to their story. So they got it retracted, which is shameful. I should look into this. My memory is that he had titles taken from him from academia, and he was removed from committees and things like that. And he was in the arena of science, he was shamed because he didn't, and he had to go to court for it. And a lot of he was charged with, I don't think the word isn't fraud. I can't remember, but because he took money and falsified, he was charged with falsifying scientific information. So I think there was also a civil case against him. Yeah, it wasn't pretty.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
That's why you're so careful about this stuff.
Yeah.
Don't want to be shamed.
No.
Well, that was very enlightening for me. Thank you for all of that.
Yes.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Anything else, John?
I can't. No, I think that we covered it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think we covered it pretty well. Unless you had something else,
No,
I think
I'm
that was
very
a
happy with
yeah. Okay.
that
All right.
information.
I think the last
And
thing I would say is just that we need to start looking at things like autism maybe from a different lens, and
yeah,
realize that people with autism have some weaknesses in areas like with social interactions and things like that, but they have strengths in other areas, like you were talking about the accountant. I know that was a movie, but
not a
people with
documentary, but
autism, yeah, but people with autism usually have strengths in areas of like being able to intensely focus,
yep,
or math, solving math problems, or just being able to really hone in on work. And just there's some others I can't think off the top of my head, but just realizing that we're all different, wired a little bit differently, and that's okay. uh, Autism isn't fatal. People don't die from autism, so you live
yeah,
a full life. And it's kind of how you learn, how your brain learns to fit in and work within your environment. And everybody's brain is trying to do that, and some of our brains are wired a little bit differently, so it's a little bit tougher for us than others. But I just am always repellent of labels. I hate
yeah,
just labeling somebody, because then it's so easy. It's kind of like putting them in a group, and now I can just that's where stereotypes come from. I can just
yep.
make all these assumptions because they're that group, and I don't have to think more deeply about them because I just stuck them over here in this group. So I would like for the message to be that we start looking at some of these things like autism through a little bit different lens. And I hope that this episode helps with that.
Well, I think it's going to be helpful. I really, boy, that's a good message to end on. That's great. Labeling, putting people in, groups of people in a box so we don't have to give too much thought to it. All of that is dangerous. So thank you, John, and thank you everybody for listening. And if you like the show, favorite, subscribe, like, whatever you do, wherever you listen, and tell a friend, a coworker, anybody. So, and then just keep tuning in. If you find this interesting, keep listening. And thank you, John, and thank you, everybody. And until next week.